Gold gleamed on every wall. The scent of roses drifted through the velvet air. But behind those silk curtains, behind that glittering crown, lived a woman who could not breathe. History painted queens as divine, bathed in jewels, adored by nations. Yet, their thrones were not made of power, but of obedience. A queen's beauty was not her blessing, it was her curse. For in the royal world, a woman's worth began and ended with her body. Every glance, every gesture, every breath was judged. The king's affection could crown her or destroy her. Her smile was a duty, her silence a command. Even her most private space, her bed, was not her own. It was the stage upon which dynasties rose or crumbled. Behind the gold and perfume hid the stench of fear. A queen was expected to be pure like a saint, fertile like the earth, and obedient like a servant. Her bedroom became a courtroom where her loyalty, purity, and usefulness were constantly tested. And when the doors closed, the true horror began, because what happened in that room was never truly private. Kings, courtiers, and even priests dictated what should happen between the royal sheets. Intimacy became ceremony. Love became law. She was adored in public, but dissected in private, a symbol of beauty trapped in a body she didn't own. For the queens of history, power didn't lie in ruling kingdoms, it lay in surviving them. And so begins our descent into the secret world behind the throne, where every queen was both a goddess and a captive, every wedding night a political ritual, and every whisper in the dark could decide the fate of an empire. Next came the most humiliating rule of all. Before she could even share the king's bed, she first had to prove that she was worthy of it. A test not of love, but of purity. A ritual that stripped women of dignity in the name of honor. It was called the Virgin Contract, and it was the beginning of her lifelong imprisonment. One that began not with chains, but with hands that examined and eyes that judged. Before a queen could wear her crown, she had to surrender her body to the judgment of others. Her purity, not her wisdom, not her courage, was the proof of her worth. Across medieval Europe, royal marriages began not with celebration, but inspection. Beneath the glittering pageantry, behind the closed doors of palaces, women were stripped of privacy in the name of virtue. In Tudor England, a queen's virginity wasn't just a personal matter, it was state property. When Anne of Cleves arrived to marry Henry VIII, her looks, her body, and her supposed innocence were scrutinized by the entire court. And when the king found her unsatisfactory, the marriage was annulled, her humiliation made public. Virginity became a currency, one traded, tested, and certified by the powerful. In France, noble brides were sometimes subjected to bedding witnesses, matrons, midwives, even priests, who verified that the young queen was untouched. In Russia, such inspections could be brutal, with midwives physically examining brides to ensure they were pure enough for royal blood. It was cruelty masked as morality. To the court, these acts were sacred rites. To the women, they were a slow unmaking of self. Imagine the horror, a future queen, barely more than a girl, standing half naked before strangers. Her fate decided not by her heart, but by her hymen. The whispers that followed her down the corridor would define her forever, virgin or not, saint or sinner, queen or whore. And when the examination was over, the verdict sealed her destiny. If she passed, she was no longer her father's daughter, she was the king's property. If she failed, she was discarded, disgraced, or worse, accused of betrayal before ever committing one. This was not love, this was ownership. The ceremony that should have united two souls instead announced a transaction. The woman's body became the evidence of alliance, her purity the foundation of political trust. Even in far-off empires, the ritual persisted. In Mughal India and the Ottoman harem, purity was equated with divine favor. Young women were inspected, guarded, and prepared like sacred offerings. For every queen who smiled in her wedding portrait, there were countless unseen tears shed in that first test of loyalty, a test she never consented to. But the ordeal did not end there, because once her purity was proven, the next night would demand an even greater sacrifice. The queen would not just be examined, she would be watched. Her first night with the king was not a moment of intimacy, but a performance for the empire. A spectacle where the sheets, not the vows, proved the union's truth. And as dawn broke, witnesses would whisper, "The marriage is consummated." The torches burned low. The guests were drunk on wine and triumph. The The king and queen were led through the corridors, not to privacy, but to performance. For the most sacred moment of their lives would unfold beneath the eyes of strangers. In medieval and Renaissance courts, the consummation of a royal marriage was not a secret. It was a ceremony, the final seal of a political alliance. The couple was escorted to the royal bedchamber, their every step followed by courtiers, clergy, and attendants. Curtains parted, prayers were said, and sometimes the witnesses stayed to ensure the act was truly done. In France, the nuptial bed was an affair of the state. During the marriage of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, hundreds gathered to watch the newlyweds climb into bed. The sheets were embroidered with the royal crest, a silent reminder that even love must serve the crown. Their private union became public theater, their bodies instruments of diplomacy. In Tudor England, the custom was equally grotesque. Servants and nobles alike waited outside the bedchamber door, listening for sounds that would confirm the royal deed. In some cases, the bed was inspected afterward, the bloodied linens displayed as proof of virginity lost and alliance fulfilled. Even in Eastern empires, the ritual carried similar weight. In the Ottoman harem, the Sultan's choice of consort was a declaration of power, and his first night with her determined her rank among rivals. In the Mughal courts, the women who shared the emperor's bed became part of a hierarchy of desire, their value determined by his favor, their survival tied to his satisfaction. It was never about passion, it was about legitimacy. A queen's body became the parchment on which dynasties wrote their future. Her pleasure was irrelevant, her pain invisible. What mattered was the heir, the proof of the king's virility, the assurance of divine blessing. Imagine the silence that followed when the doors closed, the flicker of the last candle, the weight of eyes still lingering in her mind, the queen lying beside a stranger, the man she must love, the man she must fear. Outside, courtiers whispered, waiting for the sign. Inside, she prayed, not for love, but for survival. Some kings refused even this fragile mercy. In France, England, and Russia, rumors of impotent kings or frigid queens could ignite national scandals. When Louis XVI failed to consummate his marriage for years, pamphlets mocked Marie Antoinette, branding her unnatural, blaming her for the king's failure. The royal bed became a court of ridicule. Every night, she lay beneath not one gaze, but thousands, the gaze of a nation hungry for heirs. For a queen, there was no place to hide. Her womb was a battlefield, her bed, a throne, and a trap. And once the ritual was complete, her trials had only begun. Because now, the real test awaited. Could she produce what the kingdom demanded? A son, an heir, proof that the union was blessed, that the bloodline would live on. If she succeeded, she was celebrated as divine. If she failed, she became a curse. The bedroom that once echoed with ceremonial prayers would soon fill with whispers of failure and betrayal. The next chapter of her captivity would be the cruelest of all. For now, the queen was no longer just a wife. She was a vessel, and her body belonged not to herself, but to the empire. The moment the marriage was consummated, the queen's fate narrowed to a single, suffocating purpose: to conceive. Her worth was no longer measured by her grace or her intellect, but by her womb. The bed that once symbolized union now became a laboratory of lineage, where love was secondary to fertility and failure was unforgivable. From the palaces of Europe to the harems of the East, the command was the same: produce an heir. A son meant security, legitimacy, divine approval. A daughter, miscarriage, or barren womb meant disgrace and often death. In England, Henry VIII's court became a stage for this cruel expectation. His queen, Catherine of Aragon, endured 6 pregnancies. Only 1 child survived. Her inability to give the king a son led to her public humiliation, the annulment of her marriage, and her exile. The same fate awaited Anne Boleyn, whose failure to bear a male heir turned the king's love into fury. She was executed on false charges, her body discarded as though it had betrayed its purpose. Even beyond Europe, the same brutal logic ruled. In the Ottoman Empire, the harem revolved around reproduction. A concubine who bore a son gained immense power, but one who failed could vanish overnight, poisoned, banished, or quietly strangled to make room for another. In the Forbidden City of China, empresses and consorts were subjected to endless medical rituals, swallowing strange herbs, enduring painful tonics, and submitting to court physicians who treated their bodies like instruments of statecraft. Pregnancy itself was a public affair. Every craving, every symptom, every silence was interpreted as a sign. If the queen looked unwell, whispers began. If she lost the child, prayers turned into curses. Women were blamed for miscarriages as if their bodies had defied divine will. Imagine the isolation, the queen lying in her gilded chamber, surrounded by midwives, priests, and physicians who cared not for her pain, only her productivity. Each contraction echoed like a royal decree. Each cry was a test of her loyalty to the dynasty. And when the baby arrived, lifeless, deformed, or female, she was made to face the cold judgment of the court alone. Some tried to defy their fate. Anne of Austria sought blessings from relics and saints, while Chinese empresses drank mercury and jade potions to strengthen their fertility. These so-called cures often poisoned them slowly, their beauty fading beneath layers of powder meant to conceal decay. For others, the cruelty was more psychological. The queen's every intimacy was recorded, her menstrual cycle tracked, her meals monitored. Her very body became a public calendar of hope and despair. The same courtiers who bowed before her throne would gossip behind her back about her failures as a mother. And if a new mistress conceived before the queen did, it could seal her doom. Kings, convinced that divine favor had left their wives, turned their affection elsewhere. Love could never protect a woman in a world where her value was measured by the cries of a newborn son. The royal bedchamber, once perfumed and golden, had become a chamber of judgment, a place where politics, religion, and biology conspired to break a woman's spirit. For a queen, survival meant silence. She smiled through miscarriages, bowed through betrayals, and prayed that her next breath might bring redemption. But even when she fulfilled her duty, even when she bore the long-awaited heir, her suffering did not end, because a fertile queen was still not a free one. Her body might have proven its worth, but her soul remained caged, watched, whispered about, and endlessly tested. The womb that won her security now became her prison, and soon she would learn that in the palace, even sleep was not her own. Every sigh, every glance, every heartbeat could be reported, twisted, or used against her. A queen's bed was her throne, her stage, and her cage. Even when she bore heirs, even when she fulfilled every cruel expectation, she was never truly free. The palace walls were not built to protect her, they were built to watch her. Every royal bedchamber had eyes. The ladies-in-waiting, chambermaids, and even eunuchs were not companions. They were instruments of control. Their smiles hid loyalties to the king, to the court, to everyone but her. Each reported her words, her moods, her movements. Even the way she looked at another man could end her life. Marie Antoinette's every gesture was dissected. When she laughed too freely, it was called flirtation. When she cried, it was called hysteria. Her own servants whispered her secrets to pamphleteers, feeding a nation's hatred. In Versailles, her bedroom had doors that never fully closed, a symbol of a queen who could never escape the public gaze. In the Mughal harem, every breath a queen took echoed in corridors lined with spies. The women around her, rivals cloaked as sisters, could destroy her with a single accusation. One wrong glance toward a guard, one overheard word of affection for another, and she could vanish into the dark, strangled with silks, her name erased. And in China's Forbidden City, even the emperor's wives lived under invisible chains. Each consort's schedule, meals, and clothing were dictated by ritual. If a woman was suspected of jealousy or rebellion, she was punished, sometimes by isolation, sometimes by forced suicide. Love was a privilege, not a right. The king, however, had none of these restraints. His desires were law, his infidelities divine, his pleasure unquestionable. But if the queen so much as frowned at his betrayal, she was condemned as disloyal. The most tragic part of her imprisonment was that it wore the mask of beauty. Silk gowns, jewels, and rituals hid the reality of constant fear. Even her sleep was watched. Servants listening outside her chamber, guards stationed nearby, letters intercepted. She was both adored and dissected, worshipped and condemned. Imagine the silence, the queen lying awake, the flicker of candlelight tracing the golden ceiling above her. Somewhere beyond the door, her ladies whisper, the guards shuffle, the walls breathe. She is surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. To love was dangerous, to desire was deadly, to feel unforgivable. Centuries later, portraits still show their calm, painted faces, serene, regal, divine. But beneath that stillness lies the truth of women who lived like ghosts in their own palaces. And though their chains were made of gold, the weight was no less crushing. The queen could never escape her silent prison because the world refused to let her. But what she endured, the surveillance, the suspicion, the suffocating expectations, did not vanish with her death. The echoes still linger. Because the rules that once bound queens never truly disappeared, they merely changed shape. Centuries have passed since queens were examined, watched, and punished in gilded cages. Yet, the ghosts of their suffering still linger, not in palaces, but in the quiet corners of our modern world. The rules have changed their names, but not their essence. Where virginity tests once decided royal futures, purity culture still dictates a woman's worth. Where spies once lingered outside the queen's door, the modern gaze watches through headlines, cameras, and comment sections, judging women for their bodies, choices, and desires. The queen's gilded prison has become digital, her humiliation public once more. Celebrity scandals, leaked rumors, political wives dissected by tabloids, all mirror the same old script, control disguised as fascination. Even today, many women live by rules they never chose, silenced by tradition, pressured by expectation, measured by beauty. History's cage still breathes beneath the surface, polished with progress but built from the same iron. The trauma of queens, their fear, their silence, their endurance, is not forgotten. It echoes through generations of women taught to please before they speak, to smile through pain, to bear the unbearable. The mirror of history shows us that the queen's suffering was never about royalty. It was about power, about the systems that dress control in gold and call it love. And as we stare into that mirror today, we must ask ourselves, how much of her prison still lives in us? Because the queen never truly escaped. She only changed her crown. The bedchamber is empty now, the silks are faded, the gold has lost its shine. Yet, if one listens closely, the walls still whisper, the echoes of women who once breathed within them. For centuries, their names were written in history books, but their stories were stripped of truth. Behind every portrait of grace lies a lifetime of silence. Behind every crown, a cage. They were called queens, but they were never free. Their bodies built empires, their tears sealed alliances, and their pain became the foundation of power. Yet history remembered them only for their beauty, their scandals, their airs. No one saw the woman lying awake beneath the crown, wondering who she might have been if she were allowed to be human. The royal bed was not a symbol of love. It was a monument to control. Every golden sheet, every ritual, every law that dictated a woman's worth turned intimacy into obedience. And though the empires have fallen, the lesson remains. Power built on possession is not power at all. It is fear wearing the mask of divinity. As the door closes for the final time, we are left with one haunting truth. Empires were built on their bodies, but their voices, though silenced, still rise through time, reminding us that no crown, no throne, no kingdom was ever worth the cost of a woman's freedom.